Good morning, literature group. This is Mr. T. You might be able to see from behind me that I've changed location. Mrs. Terrier and I, a couple of days ago, returned to Leesburg, Virginia. And so we're living in our cottage called Lanyap Cottage, right behind Mr. Terrio and Mrs. J. Terrio's big house, where Robin and Boo also live. So I'll be doing my recording work and my virtual MAB participation in elementary from right here. So today, what I'm doing is I'm recording chapter 3 of The Incredible Journey for you guys for the literature group. So here we go. Chapter 3. In the cold hour before dawn, the bull terrier woke, then staggered painfully to his feet. He was trembling with cold and was extremely hungry and thirsty. He walked stiffly in the direction of the pool nearby, passing on the way the cat, who was crouched over something held between his paws. The terrier heard a crunching sound as the cat's jaws moved and wagged his tail in interest, moving over to investigate. The cat, regarding him distantly, then stalked away, leaving the having a problem with turning the pages here. Leaving the carcass, but to the terrier it was a disappointing mess of feathers only. He drank long and deeply at the pool, and on his return tried the feathers again, for he was ravenous. But they stuck in his gullet and he retched them out. He nibbled at some stalks of grass, then delicately his lips rolled back over his teeth, picked a few overripe raspberries from a low bush. He had always liked to eat domestic raspberries this way, and although the taste was reassuringly familiar, it did nothing to appease his hunger. He was pleased to see the young dog appear presently. He wagged his tail and licked the other dog's face, and then followed resigningly when a move was made toward the direction of the road. They were followed a few moments later by the cat, who was still licking his lips after his feathery breakfast. What do you think he ate? In the gray light of dawn, the trio continued down the side of the road until they reached a point where it took a right angle turn. Right angle. That's geometry. How many degrees in a right angle, you guys? A measurement angle. Here they hesitated before a disused logging trail that led westward from the side of the road, its entrance almost concealed by overhanging branches. The leader lifted his head and appeared almost my computer is slow to move the pages. Almost as though he was searching for some scent of something, some reassurance, and apparently he found it. For he had led his companions up the trail between the overhanging trees. The going here was softer, the middle was overgrown with grass, and the ruts on either side were full of dead leaves. The close-growing trees, which almost met overhead, would allow more shade when the sun rose higher. These were all considerations that the old dog needed, for he had been tired today even before he started, and his pace was already considerably slower. Both dogs were very hungry and watched enviously when the cat caught and killed a chipmunk while they rested by a stream in the middle of the day. But when the old dog advanced with a hopeful wag of his tail, the cat, growling, retreated into the bushes with his dead prey. Puzzled and disappointed, the terrier sat listening to the crunching sounds inside the bushes, saliva running in his mouth. You'd think the cat would share, but cats are instinctive, and when they're hungry, they keep the food for themselves. A few minutes later, the cat emerged and sat down, daintily cleaning his whiskers. The old dog licked the black Siamese face with his painted tongue, with his panting tongue, and was affectionately patted on the nose by the cat in return. Restless with hunger, he wandered up the banks of the creek, investigating every rock and hollow, pushing his hopeful nose through tunnels of wedged sedge and into the yielding earth of Mold Hills. Sadly, he lay down by an unrewarding blueberry bush, drew his paws down tightly over his blackened face, and licked the dirt off of them. The young dog too was hungry, but but he would have to be on the verge of starvation before the barriers of deep-rooted Labrador heredity would be broken down. For generations, his ancestors had been bred to retrieve without harming, and there was nothing of the hunter in his makeup. Wow, I didn't know that. As yet, any killing was abhorrent to him. He drank deeply at the stream and urged his companions on. Interesting. Can't kill an animal because he's a natural but he's trained as a retrieving dog. So when hunters would kill a prey, or the Labrador knew to bring it back to the hunter without eating it. Turns out that this training now, this inbred understanding, is going to make it difficult. Let's continue. The trail ran high over the crest of this hilly wooded country, and the surrounding countryside below was filled with an overwhelming beauty of color, the reds and the vermilions of the occasional maples, the pale birch, and the yellow poplar, and here and there the scarlet cluster of mountain ash berries against a rich dark green background of spruce, pine, and cedar. Sound like a beautiful northern hemisphere woods. Several times they passed log ramps built into the side of a hill, picking their way across the deep ruts left by the timber sleighs below. And sometimes they passed derelict buildings and rank overgrown clearings, old stables for the bush horses, and living quarters for the men who had worked there a generation ago. So a generation ago, that means that these logging camps have long been abandoned and there's no humans there. The windows were broken and sagging, and the weeds were growing up between the floorboards, and even one old rusted cook stove had fireweed springing from the firebox. The animals, strangely enough, did not like these evidences of human occupation, even though it's long ago, and skirted them as far as possible, hair raising along their backs. So the animals have an instinct that makes them wary of humans. That's the author's telling us something there to remember. Keep it in mind. Hold on. Late in the afternoon, the old dog's pace had slowed down to a stumbling walk, and it seemed as if only sheer determination were keeping him on his feet at all. He was dizzy and swaying, and his heart was pounding. The cat must have sensed this general failing, for he now walked steadily beside the dogs, very close to his towering old friend, and uttered plaintive, worried bleats. Finally, the old dog came to a standstill in a deep rut half filled with muddy water. He stood there as if he had not even the strength to step around it. His head sagged and his whole body was trembling. Then he tried to lap the water. His legs seemed to crumble under him, and he collapsed, half in and half out of the rut. His eyes were closed, and his body moved only to the long, shallow, shuddering breaths that came at widening intervals. Sounds serious. Soon he lay completely limp and still. The young dog became frantic now. He whined as he stretched at the edge of the rut, then nudged and pushed with his nose, doing everything in his power to rouse the huddled, unresponsive body. Again and again he barked, and the cat growled softly and continuously, walking back and forth and rubbing his whole length against the dirty, muddied head. There was no response to their attention. The old dog lay unconscious and remote. The two animals grew silent and sat by his side, disturbed and uneasy, until at last they turned and left him, neither looking back. The Labrador disappearing into the bushes before the crack of broken branches marked his progress farther. Hold it. Farther away, the cat stalking a partridge, which had appeared at the side of the trail some 100 yards away and was pecking unconcernedly at the sandy dirt. But at the shrill warning of a squirrel, that wasn't helpful. It flew off across the trail with a sudden whir into the trees while the cat was still some distance away. Undaunted, still licking his lips in anticipation, the cat continued around the bend in the trail in search of another and was lost to sight. Now, partridge is a fairly large bird, so if the cat could catch that, then he could share it with the dog. The shadows lengthened across the desert. Deserted track, and the evening wind sighed down it to sweep a flurry of whispering leaves across the rut. Their brown brittleness light as a benison, and they drifted across the unheeding white form. That would be the dog. The curious squirrel peered in bright-eyed wonder from a nearby tree, clucking softly to itself. A shrew ran halfway across, paused, and ran back, and there was a soft sound of wings as a whiskey jack landed and swayed to and fro on a birch branch, tilting its head one side as he looked down and called to his mate to come and join him. The wind died away, a sodden hush descended. Suddenly there was a sound of a heavy body pushing through the underbrush, accompanied by sharp crackling of branches, and the spell was broken. Chattering shrilly in alarm and excitement, the squirrel ran up the trunk of the tree, and the whisperjacks flew off. So the author is telling us that the scene has changed here. Listen up. Now onto the trail on all fours scampered a half-grown bear cub. Round furry ears perked and small deep-set eyes alight with curiosity and sharp little face as it beheld the old dog. There was a grunting, snuffing sound in the bush behind the cub. His mother was investigating a rotten tree trunk. The cub stood for a moment and then hesitatingly advanced toward the rut where the terrier lay still. He sniffed around, wrinkled his facile nose at the unfamiliar smell, and then reached out a long, curved black paw and tapped the white head. For a moment, the mist of unconsciousness cleared. The old dog opened his eyes, aware of the danger. The cub sprang back in alarm and watched from a safe distance. Seeing that there was no further movement, he loped back and cuffed again with his paw, this time harder, and watched for a response. Only enough strength was left in the old dog for his valiant baring of his teeth. He snarled faintly with pain and hatred when his shoulder was racked with wicked claws of the excited cub, and made an attempt to struggle to his feet. The smell of the drawn blood excited the cub further. He straddled the dog's body and started to play with the long white tail, nibbling at the end like a child playing with a new toy. But there was no response. All conscious effort drained, the old dog no longer felt any pain or indignity. He lay as though asleep, his eyes veiled and unseeing, his lips still curled in a snarl. Wow. Around the bend in the trail, dragging a large dead partridge by the wing, came the cat. The wing sprang back softly from his mouth as he gazed transfixed at the scene before him. In one split second, a terrible transformation took place. The blue eyes glittered hugely and evilly in the black masked face, and every hair on the wheat-colored body stood upright, so he appeared twice his real size. Even the chocolate-colored tail puffed up as it switched from side to side. He crouched low to the ground, tense and ready, and uttered a high, ear-splitting scream. As the startled cub turned, the cat sprang. He landed on the back of the dark-furred neck, clinging with his monkey-like hind legs while he raked his claws across the cub's eyes. Again and again he raked with these terrible talons, hissing and spitting in murderous devilry until the cub was screaming in pain and fear, blinded with blood, making ineffectual brushing movements with his paws to dislodge the unseen horror on his back. His screams were answered by a thunderous roar as a huge black she-bear crashed through the bushes and rushed to the cub. She swiped at the clinging cat with a tremendous paw, but the cat was too quick for her, and with a hiss of fury, leapt to the ground and disappeared behind a tree. The unfortunate cub's head received the full force of the blow, and he was sent spinning across the track into the bushes. In a blind, frustrated rage, maddened by the cries of her cub, the mother turned for something slow to turn the page. On which to vent her fury, and saw the still figure of the old dog. Even as she lumbered snarling towards him, the cat distracted her attention with a sudden leap to the side of the track. The bear halted, then raised up to full height for attack, red eyes glinting savagely, neck upstretched and head weaving from side to side in a menacing snake-like way. The cat uttered another banshee scream and stepped forward with stiff-legged sideward movement, his squinting, terrible eyes fixed on his enormous adversary. Something like fear or indecision crept into the bear's eyes as the cat advanced. She shuffled back a step with a lowered head. Slow, deliberate, purposeful, the cat came on. Again the bear retreated, bewildered by the tactics of this terrible small animal, distracted by her cub's whimpering, slowly falling back before the relentless inch-by-inch advance. Now the cat stopped and crouched low, lashing his tail from side to side. The bear stopped too, shifting her weight uneasily before the spring that must follow, longing to decamp, but afraid to turn her back. A sudden crackle of undergrowth turned the huge animal into a statue, rigid with apprehension. And when a great dog sprang out of the bush and stood beside the cat, teeth baring and snarling, every hair on its russet back and ruff erect, she dropped to all fours, turned swiftly, and fled towards her cub. There was a lasting growl of desperate bravado from the bush, and a whimpering cry. Then the sounds of the bear's escape receded in the distance. Finally, all was quiet again. The curious squirrel leapt from his ringside seat and scrambled farther down the trunk of the tree. The cat shrank back to his normal size. His eyes regained their usual cool, detached look. He shook each paw distastefully in turn, glanced briefly at the limp, muddled bundle by his feet, blood oozing from 4 deep, parallel gashes on his shoulder, then turned and sauntered slowly down the track towards his partridge. The young dog nosed his friend all over, his lips wrinkled at the rank bear smell, then attempted to staunch the wounds with his rough tongue. He scratched fresh leaves over the blood-stained ones and then barked by the old dog's head, but there was no response. And at last he lay down, panting on the grass. His eyes were uneasy and watchful. The hair still stood upright in the ridge on his back, and from time to time he whined perplexedly. He growled softly, but the cat ignored him and continued his tearing and eating. Presently, the enticing smell of raw, warm meat filtered through into the old dog's senses. He opened one eye and gave an appreciative sniff. The effect was galvanizing. His muddled, half-chewed tail stirred. He raised his shoulders and then his forelegs, and with a convulsive effort, like an old war horse getting up after a fall. He was a pitiful sight. Half his body had lain in the rut was black and soaked, while the other was streaked and stained with blood. He looked like some gross harlequin. He trembled violently and uncontrollably throughout the length of his body, but in the sunken depths of the slanted black-currant eyes there was a faint gleam of interest, which increased as he pushed his nose into the still, warm bundle of soft gray feathers. This time, there was no growling rebuff over the prey. Instead, the cat sat down a few yards away, studiedly aloof and indifferent, and then painstakingly washed down the length of his tail. When the end twitched, he pinned it down with his paw. The old dog ate, crunched the bones ravenously with his blunt teeth. Even as his companions watched him, a miraculous strength slowly seeped back into his body. He had to have nutrition. He was just worn out and had used all of the energy that his body had stored up. He was hungry. He dozed for a while, a feather hanging out of his mouth, and then woke again to finish the last morsel of the partridge. By nightfall, he was able to walk over to the soft grass at the side of the track, where he lay down and blinked happily at his companions, wagging his pitiful tail. The Labrador lay down beside him and licked the wounded shoulder. An hour or two later, the purring cat joined them, carelessly dropping another succulent morsel by his old friend's nose. It was a deer mouse, a little creature with big eyes and long hind legs like a miniature kangaroo. It was swallowed with a satisfying gulp, and soon the old dog slept. But the cat purring against his chest, and the young dog curled at his side, were wakeful and alert most of the remaining night. Neither one moved from his sides. And that's the end of chapter 3. I just thought I'd comment on the fantastic descriptive ability of our author. Again and again, he describes these scenes, and the description of the fight between the cat and the dogs and the bear cub and the mother bear was amazing. I don't know about you, but my blood pressure went up, and I was, whoa, listening to that, the way he described it, wow, really something. I hope you'd enjoyed it. We'll go on to chapter 4 for literature group next week. And you guys take care. It's great being back here in Leesburg and working with you guys and Mr. Smith and Miss Kiefer as we continue to make MAB Elementary a very special place to be, even if it can only be there virtually. Take care, guys. Mr. T out.